Chapter 15 looks at the topics of education and health. Does the odds of going to college simply reflect someone's personal desire for more schooling, or does society play some sort of role in that? So researchers claim that nearly all parents would say they'd like to have their children go to college, while about 41% of non-Hispanic white people between the ages of 18 and 24 in the U.S. were enrolled in college in fall 2020. A much smaller share, 22.4% of Native Americans and Alaskan Native people were on campus. Asian Americans are especially likely to attend college at a rate of 63.7%. So our society is organized in a way that makes it easier for some people to access higher education than it is for others. So education refers to is a social institution through which society provides its members with important knowledge. That's basic facts, job skills, cultural norms, values. And schooling would be that formal education, that formal instruction under the direction of specially trained teachers. Now, the extent of schooling that happens in a culture really depends on economic development. So low-income countries don't have as much formal schooling, and that reflects their national culture. Worldwide, about 8% of children never go to school, and about 25% never reach secondary grades. So that would be high school. Between 10 and 15% of the world's population cannot read or write. And here we can see rates of illiteracy on a global map. So in India, which has become a middle-income nation, they have about 10% of the U.S. average income. Child labor has been outlawed there, but many children continue to work. And 99% of children complete primary school, while just 37 complete. Wow. That's a big error. Complete high school. Education is shaped by the patriarchy there, as it is here. In Japan, which is like a high income nation, right? Industrialization brought mandatory education in 1872. In the earlier schooling, the focus is on traditions and competitive exams, and that helps decide what happens for students in the future. 97% of students in Japan graduate from high school, and they perform particularly well in math and science. So here we can see educational achievement in the U.S. from 1910 to 2021, right? The percentage that are high school graduates. So in 1910, only 13.5% of Americans graduate high school. And the average years of schooling was 8th grade, so basically up through junior high or middle school. And today we have nearly or a little over 90% completing high school, and 37.8% are college grads. And look how much the college graduation rate has jumped in just the last 2 decades. So in 2000, it was 25, about a quarter of people, and today it's a little over a third. In the US, we're one of the first countries to pursue mass education. That's shaped by our higher standard of living and our democracy. We have a strong record of higher education. In a lot of other countries, it's considered prestigious to come to the United States to get your college degree. We try to promote equal opportunity. Our educational system stresses a lot of practical learning, which is in line with progressive education. So let's look at our Soc theories and what they have to say about schooling or education. So remember that structural functional model is looking at what functions and purposes any particular institution serves in our culture. So the structural functional theory focuses on the way in which schooling supports the smooth operation and stability of society, right? So as we gain more complex technology, we turn to teachers and folks that are trained in this technology to pass on their specialized knowledge. Faculty at colleges and universities create culture and pass that on to students. And research in different fields leads to discoveries and changes in our way of life. So I read an article the other day that was like, I think it was like 20 things that we, Gen X, which is my generation, learned that are no longer true, right? Things that were taught as facts. So today it's pretty well accepted that all the continents used to be together as one continent. But when I was in school, even though they look like they fit together, We were told they didn't. Okay. Things like Pluto used to be a planet and now it's a dwarf planet. And that's because of how Pluto has changed. But science has allowed us to learn that, right? When George Washington was alive, we didn't know about dinosaurs, right? So knowledge is constantly growing and changing. Schooling molds a diverse population into one society. It's a place where we learn a lot about cultural norms and values, and it increases meritocracy and provides a path to social mobility. Now, schooling also has some latent functions. Latent functions are basically like hidden functions. They're not the out and out stated objectives of something. But schooling provides childcare. And the place we really learned this was during the pandemic. Once people were home and children were not in school and parents had to take care of their kids all day while working, people very quickly realized, oh, we better get these schools open soon, right? Because school also provides childcare. It occupies people during their teens and 20s who would otherwise be competing in the job market. It brings people together and people meet lifelong friends in school. College in particular kind of acts like a marriage broker, right? It introduces romantic relationships. I've been to weddings of several students that I had here in the program, but 2 of them met in the program and are married. It establishes networks. These can provide valuable career sources. I've had students help each other get jobs once they got a job somewhere. I had a grad recently reach out to me and ask me to be a reference because he wanted to hire another grad from our program. So looking at this perspective, it really stresses how education supports how our society operates. But it also overlooks things, right? Like students and teachers are very different. Behavior varies. Schools vary, and it doesn't really address problems of educational systems and how class structures reproduced. Now, that symbolic interaction theory, right, is the idea that we create the reality we experience, that there isn't necessarily like an objective reality out there, and talks about how the idea that if we believe a situation to be real, it can still impact us as though it is real, right? People who expect people to act in certain ways often then encourage that behavior, whether that's positive behavior or negative behavior. Now, this looks at how we build reality into our daily interactions, but it overlooks beliefs that are built into the systems that already exist and our institutions that already exist. Now, looking at our third perspective here, right? Social conflict. This is the idea that, or challenges the idea that like schooling brings out the best in everyone, right? Helps develop everyone's talents and abilities. Some people sort of get left behind. School drops the ball for some people, right? School is also a way of controlling people. It reinforces the status quo. We learn a lot about like middle class values and what's expected of us. We've really gone to this place where there's standardized testing in many states in order to graduate high school. Although Massachusetts just recently voted to remove the MCAS as a graduation requirement. And what has happened with that instead is with all this standardized testing, people start teaching to the test, right? And so, everyone's sort of channeled into the same information. Now, some schools engage in what's called school tracking, right? We assign students to different programs, right? Maybe you're in college prep classes. Maybe you're in AP classes. When boomers were growing up, and a little bit with my generation too, with Gen X, but not as much, teachers would often decide before kids went to high school which kids were sort of college bound and which ones weren't, and funnel kids they didn't think were college material into vocational schools. Now, supposedly tracking kids this way and putting them into tracks helps meet their individual needs and abilities, but it often means then that students that struggle a little bit more are placed in lower achieving classes or in lower tracks, and they might not ever get the chance to rise to their potential. Now, here in the U.S., we have both public and private schools. Public schools are fully funded by taxpayer money. And private schools, you pay tuition to go to. And there's a wide variety in private schools. We have a lot of religious-based private schools here in the U.S. We also have a lot of elite prep schools where the tuition is as much as or more than college. Students in private schools often outperform students in public schools. That's because of some advantages that private schools have. So they often have smaller classes. The coursework is often more demanding, right? They're often more selective, harder to get into. There's more discipline. Public schools are not all the same. So public schools in most states are funded through local property taxes, right? So in a community or a city or a town that is much more well off with higher property values, there's going to be more money through property taxes for education. Those cities and towns often also have lower populations, so more real dollars for fewer students, right? When you get into the city, you have fewer dollars for more students, right? And so this is why you go into some public schools and everybody's issued a computer and they've got state-of-the-art technology. And in some schools, there's not enough paper to make photocopies. Who tends to benefit from this? This is one of those examples of privilege, right? And where white privilege or privilege as a result of your class plays a role, because unequal schooling tends to benefit white folks. The home environment also makes a difference in our school performance. How much education did your parents expose you to before you even went off to school? So before I went to school, my mom made sure that I knew how to read, I knew how to write my name, I knew how to do a lot of stuff that people were learning in kindergarten. My parents read to me a lot, right? Now, I imagine all parents probably want to do that for their children, right? But some parents have resources to do it and some don't. Some parents have time to take their kids to the library or the bookstore and buy them things and read to them. And some parents are working multiple jobs to get by and don't have the same opportunities. Here we can see teacher salaries across the country. And while pretty much all public school teachers are vastly underpaid, some places pay much better. So Massachusetts, we pay pretty well. The average public school teacher in the U.S. makes about $65,000 a year. And New York, that's about $87,000 a year. But in some states, it's like $45,000 a year. Okay. I would bet if you mapped this out, some of this correlates to taxes. Now, during COVID, schools shut down for a little bit, right? Remember, we all sort of, colleges mostly went home for spring break. And then while we were home, we're sort of told, we're going to take 2 more weeks so that this COVID thing dies out. And then kids kind of went home from K through 12. And then we were home for the rest of that school year, right? Most places were not prepared to transition to online learning. And so if you guys remember, those first few months were kind of chaotic. They weren't very organized. And then we got a little bit more organized for the fall of 2020. Depending on, your school. Maybe you went hybrid, couple days a week in person, couple days a week online. Maybe you were fully online, right? But there became a lot more structure to it. This places a greater burden on disadvantaged students. So when the initial move is like, okay, we'll move everything online. If you live in a more privileged community that has issued laptops or where all the parents already have computers at home, then it's an easier transition to online learning, okay? My brother and sister both teach in Everett, where 90% of students qualify for free lunch, okay? So many of them living are disadvantaged socioeconomically. The city had to purchase Chromebooks and then teachers volunteered to deliver them to students' homes. Okay, now you have a computer. Do you have internet at home, right? So the pandemic really showed us some of this inequality. It also meant that students are behind, right? When we're starting to see that now. There's certain material that students just didn't learn because of how the pandemic impacted us. And because we had more important concerns at the time, honestly. Now, higher education, we kind of uphold this, especially here in the US. This is our path to good jobs, right? Even jobs that in order to do them, you don't technically need a college degree, require a college degree. College is most common, though, amongst high-income families because school is expensive, right? Even with student loans, school's expensive. And so we see some of these big economic gaps here. I'm sure you all know someone who wanted to go to college, got into college, is a good student, and maybe even with loans just couldn't afford to go, and so they couldn't go. Now we're seeing some alternatives to that. Massachusetts now has access to free education for community colleges, right? So that's a huge path forward for people. We're seeing some elite universities are now ensuring that tuition is covered for people who make less than $100,000 a year or less than $200,000 a year. So we're seeing some changes, but as you all know intimately, school is very expensive. And so here we see educational attainment based on different categories, right? So based on racial categories, based on gender, and then like percentages, right? So if we look at white men, 95%, right, of people 25 and older have graduated high school and 4 or more years of college, right? Amongst black men, a little bit less. Hispanics, a little bit less, right? And then, sorry, that's high school. Sorry, I read this wrong. Then when we look at college, right, we're seeing amongst white men, 40%. Notice women, higher rates. Women go to college at higher rates and graduate at higher rates, right? So we're seeing these numbers increase, right, but still pretty small. Right, and then we can see how this impacts our earnings, right? So people with a professional degree would be like a JD, because a JD, a Juris Doctorate, a law degree is not considered a master's degree. Well, I guess it really is considered a master's degree, but it's not a doctorate, right? It's not a PhD. A PhD is a higher level degree. Might also include a medical degree. Actually, I'm not sure how they define this here, right? But you can see the more education you have, the median income for those folks increases and rises, right? And that's just because access to some jobs require an advanced degree. So for you guys, look, right, if you had 4 years of high school, the median income for men is $50,000. Ladies, look at how low it is for us, $36,000. But with your bachelor's degree, you're looking at $81,000 versus $61,000, right? So that 4 years of college hopefully will pay off for you. As I mentioned, we're expanding higher education opportunities, right? Okay, student loans. Oh, we're all intimately familiar with this, right? The level of student debt has increased. So it used to be like for boomers, I've heard Senator Elizabeth Warren talk about this, that you could work a summer job, make enough money, and then that covered state tuition for the year. Didn't cover room and board, didn't cover tuition at like Harvard, right? But you could basically in the summer make the money you needed for your tuition. But today people have just tons and tons and tons of student debt. Student loans are also charged an interest rate that is often higher than what businesses or companies are charged. It is also one of the few things you cannot discharge in a bankruptcy filing. This means people are delaying marriage, delaying having children. It makes buying a home more difficult. Community colleges do provide some solutions here. It's generally, the tuition there is pretty low. And they're often open enrollment, so there's no requirements in order to enroll. Those faculty are not involved in like research or publishing, so they're really focused on teaching. We also at Fisher, some of us do research, but we are primarily a teaching institution as well. But schooling takes social privilege and turns it into personal merit, right? So when you have a college degree, we're like, you worked hard, you earned what you have. And that is true. But if access to college is also based on privilege, then it really isn't just completely merit, right? We see credentials as badges of ability rather than the fact that our family might have had affluence or we had some advantages that helped us get here. Some societies then are also very focused, companies in those societies, on hiring people that have the best education, right? So like, there's sort of this joke, right? How will you know if someone went to Harvard? Don't worry, they'll tell you, right? They often, though, don't say they went to Harvard. They'll tell you they went to school in Cambridge, right? And that's how they're letting you know they went to Harvard. Okay, the social conflict approach does help us see how formal education can be linked to inequality and how schooling takes privilege and turns it into like, I'm very worthy, I've earned this, right? But it overlooks the extent to which schooling does provide upward social mobility, right? So, like getting a college degree does make a difference in your income, and it does make a difference in things that people are able to achieve. All right, what are some problems and issues in education? So, in some schools, violence and discipline is a big problem, right? Some schools are grappling with serious issues, teenagers who are pregnant, drug and alcohol abuse. Schools are not creating that violence, it's coming from surrounding communities. And we also clearly in the US have a major problem with school shootings. And that's a super complex problem. We do have a class on that in the criminal justice program on mass shootings in general. Super complex problem. I mean, easy problem to solve. We need to reduce the number of guns. But beyond this one bullet point we're going to cover today. Now, school bureaucracy really kind of gets in the way of education, right? So like in some places, like there's a lot of rigidity and uniformity about like what needs to be taught and, you know, what needs to be covered. Schools are very focused on what's the percentage of kids who pass these tests and where do they rank. We could do a lot better at humanizing school here. Now, our book says that in college, right, passivity has kind of become the norm. Most students think that classroom passivity is their fault, and many of them find little value in classroom discussion. Now, our class is kind of quiet, which is a little bit typical for intro social classes. But if you've been in another class of mine, you know that this doesn't really hold true in the criminal justice program here at Fisher. We are pretty chatty in our classes and pretty involved in discussion. And our last few classes here in sociology have also been super chatty and really involved and having great discussion. So how we teach, what our strategy is, can really enhance that classroom environment. I personally believe that when we're having discussion, we remember the discussion and therefore we remember the concepts better than if I just stand up here and lecture to you guys. Now, another concern in education is people dropping out of school, right? So in the 1960s, it was about 16% of people dropped out before graduating high school. In 2020, that's down to 5.3%. Dropping out occurs least amongst white folks, and it's most pronounced amongst non-white folks. And it's linked to problems that are related to other class issues, right? So sometimes people have to leave to work. Sometimes people are really struggling in school. I worked with a lot of teenage boys that were involved in the criminal justice system. Many of them were on their third attempt at trying to pass ninth grade. And so when they turned 16, they just bailed on school. It's kind of understandable. If I've been trying to pass ninth grade for 3 years and I'm having a hard time because the system has failed me somewhere, yeah, why would I keep coming into a place where I feel like a failure every day? Probably the biggest issue, right, is the quality of our schooling, right? So some schools, again, are just like outstanding. They offer a wide variety of classes. There's a lot of challenging classes. They're unique in their curriculums. They're creative, right? They offer, a wide variety of classes so that it's not just like, are you good in traditional classes? My niece is in high school at Wakefield High, and I went to her induction ceremony the other night for the National Arts Honor Society. There's 40 kids in that school that are juniors and seniors that qualify to be in the National Arts Honor Society because the school offers a lot of art classes. And afterwards, they had a gallery of student submissions, and it was very impressive. You look at them and you're like, these kids are 16, 17, 18, and look at the art they're producing, right? So if math isn't your thing, English isn't your thing, but you're super creative, there's an opportunity for you to succeed, right? And to live up to your potential. Functional illiteracy refers to the lack of reading and writing skills needed for everyday living, and about 20% of adults lack these skills. It doesn't mean they can't read or write at all, right? A big issue I would say today is like critical thinking and media literacy. How do we know when we look something up online or we read something, how to assess it and know that it's accurate? How hard we work in school really depends on the cultural values, right? And some of that is the values in your neighborhood, the values in your family, the values amongst your friends. We've also seen substantial grade inflation in recent decades, where students are earning grades that maybe don't match the actual level of their work, right? They're earning higher grades than what they would have earned in the past. Some of this is pressure from schools and administrators. Another issue is school choice. Some folks feel that they should be able to get a voucher for taxes and maybe choose where their kid goes to school, including things like private school. Supporters of this claim that giving parents a choice about where to enroll their children is the only way to improve all schools. Critics are like, hey, you know what that's going to mean? It means we're not committed to public education. And it means the kids that get left behind are going to get subpar education. So some of the ways we can do this, one is through vouchers, right? Money from the government, and families can use that to pay school tuition. That's money, though, then that gets pulled away from public schools, right? Leaving those public schools with less funding. Magnet schools or specialty schools, right? They might have a specialty program. Maybe they focus on the arts. Maybe they focus on science and technology. Charter schools or public schools that are sort of private. They have a little bit more freedom to try new things. And then there's for-profit schools. Common Core, you guys are probably familiar with this. These are state-generated standards. Massachusetts has some of the highest standards for education in the country. And even though we just voted to get rid of MCAS, we also have some of the highest performing students in the country. We're ranked either number 1 or number 2 for education. Supporters of this are like, hey, this makes sure that kids know certain things and everybody knows them and that that's uniform from one state to another. Critics are like, let's stop telling our teachers how to teach, right? And one size does not fit all. And it means that we're teaching to a test as opposed to teaching material. Now, some people choose to homeschool, right? And different states have different rules and regulations for this. This has gained a lot of popularity and it increased during the pandemic. So when some schools did go back in the fall of 2020, some parents were still really anxious, especially because there weren't vaccines for children yet. And they didn't really want their kids in schools, and they chose to homeschool them. Other challenges, what do we do for folks that learn differently, right? That have either some type of intellectual disability, right? Or intellectual differences in how they learn. The concept of mainstreaming is how do we take kids who in the past, we put them in a special need program or we put them in separate classrooms. How do we include them and mainstream them into the overall educational program? It's also a teacher shortage. During the pandemic, teachers, as you are all probably well aware, are not well paid, work a ton, work more hours than they're supposed to, and are often unappreciated. And so many teachers, once that got worse with the pandemic, were like, peace out, see you later. Okay. We see this in areas like math, science, special ed. Roughly half of teachers are not satisfied with their jobs. And if you don't pay a job well, you're not going to attract the most qualified people. So what can we do? We could get rid of teachers that are not good and hire better teachers, right? We can recruit globally. We can pay teachers more. So looking ahead, the public school system continues to struggle. We don't have quick fixes because these are social problems, right? And any social problem is complex. Information technology is reshaping schools, right? My niece is taking an advanced math class that is not offered in her high school. It's self-paced through a college. And so at school, she has a free period that she can use to work on that. She also works on it at home. She will get credit for it in high school, and it will place her ahead of where she is in math and provide her with an opportunity that her school doesn't have. Education is political. Why? Because everything here is political. It's too bad, right? So conservatives are less likely to see public school in a positive light. They push for more school choice. They believe people should not have their student debt forgiven, even though we forgive the debt of businesses and bail them out all the time. Progressives are more likely to see public school in a positive light and push back against school choice. They support forgiving school debt. All right, now let's look at topic number 2, health. So medicine is a social institution that focuses on fighting disease and improving health, and health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Now, culture and society affects our health, right? Cultural patterns define health. I think we were talking about this in class recently, right? Like the US allows all kinds of things in our food that Europe is like, that causes cancer, right? So that's dyes, preservatives, right? Cultural standards of health change over time. So you guys have grown up in a time where basically everybody drinks water with their meals. I grew up in a time where everybody had the healthy drink you had at dinner was milk. Pretty much nobody drank water, and everybody drank soda and juice. Kids drank juice. That was considered healthy, right? Our technology affects health, right? Social inequality affects health. So in low-income countries, there's a shorter life expectancy, and there's a lot of disease that's linked to poverty, right? So how does poverty threaten our health? Well, do we have enough nutrition and proper nutrition? I think we talked about this the other day as well, right? Like healthy food is expensive. Fresh food is expensive. Things that are cheap in the grocery store and that are affordable are things like that Mama Celeste 99-cent pizza that will do in a pinch, but doesn't taste great, right? But it's $1, right? The ingredients for salad are expensive. A head of lettuce today, November 2024, is $3. Okay. Is our water clean? Do we have access to good medicine? We are very fortunate. We are in Boston. This is kind of like the medicine capital of the country and maybe even the world. We have 5, 6, 7 in the greater Boston area alone of the best hospitals in the country, like state-of-the-art cancer care. Children's Hospital in Boston, people fly from all over the country to have their children treated there because it's the best medical care. Okay. Sanitation. What do you have access to? Even things like, think about, I bet a lot of you guys work out, right? And some of you guys probably have a gym membership. Well, a gym membership costs money, right? And it's great. And it's too bad everybody doesn't have access to one. And yeah, sure, you could take a run outside. There's things you can do for physical activity that cost you nothing, right? But like a gym and a routine around a gym is easier and, provide you with a lot of opportunities, provide you with weights. I swim for exercise. I don't have a pool at home and I live in Boston. Well, I live in Wakefield. So I wouldn't be able to swim unless I had an indoor pool in the winter, right? So I need a gym in order to do that. In high income nations, right? In the 1900s, what was mostly killing us, early 1900s, were things like influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis. Those are pretty, they still exist today, but there's vaccines for pneumonia and influenza. There is a vaccine for TB. We don't give it in the US, but in Europe, they give it. Things, all kinds of things that we have vaccines for today, people used to die from. People died from measles, right? And we've pretty much eliminated many of these diseases. Today, chronic illness is what kills people. Heart disease, cancer, stroke, and usually kills us when we're old. So here's the leading causes of death in the U.S., 1900 versus 2019, right? So, our list from 1900 are all things we've made excellent advances in. On the other hand, our list for 2019 looks pretty frightening. Okay, things like our age, our gender, our sex, our class, our race. I just said gender and sex. Impact our health, right? So women's bodies face different challenges than men's bodies do. Obviously, when you're young, you guys are at an age where, oh my word, appreciate your metabolism because it's so high right now. You guys can eat whatever. You sleep so well. This goes away when you get older, okay? Compared to the rest of the world, our health standards are pretty good. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, but compared to other high-income nations, we're not doing as great, okay? So social epidemiology is the study how health and disease are distributed throughout society's population, right? So there's certain things that we know happen in terms of age. You guys will find in a couple decades, maybe 5-6 years ago, turned out I had tennis elbow, which is, you can get it from stuff besides tennis because I don't play tennis. And I remember I asked the doctor, well, what did I do? Because I didn't injure myself. I'm not sure what I did to cause this. And he said, once you're over 40, these things just happen. Okay. You guys have seen me wear glasses in class every day. I only started wearing glasses a few years ago. They're only for reading. But that is also just from getting older. Once you hit over 40, those of you not wearing glasses now, you will probably be wearing them. Okay, we don't have young people dying. It's pretty rare. Good job. Women, generally, better health than men. Part of this is because men engage in more risky behavior, right? So the accidental death rate is twice that for men than it is for women. Men commit suicide at higher rates. They're at higher risk for homicide. In terms of social class, right? I mean, we can all think of common sense ways that our income and our wealth is related to our health, right? So obviously the type of food you can afford to buy is going to be different, right? Like if you have not an unlimited budget, right? But like you don't have to nickel and dime when you go to the grocery store, right? Do you have access to the gym and regularly seeing your doctor? And how does that decrease your health risks, right? Poverty amongst Black folks helps explain why Black folks are more likely to die in infancy, more likely to have certain conditions. Infant mortality rate used to be super high up until maybe 100, 150 years ago, right? Now today, it was super common, in the 1800s for people to have children that died. Like most families had this, okay? Today, that would be pretty rare. But people who are disadvantaged, right? This rate is twice as high. The poorest children are vulnerable to disease, right? If you don't have, insurance, are you getting your vaccinations? Are you seeing a doctor, right? Are you able to see a doctor for preventative care? Or can you not see a doctor until you're really sick? Things like cigarette smoking play a role in our health, right? So cigarette smoking has gone down, although your generation seems to be into vaping. And that is just as bad for you, right? So smoking's not as common as it once was. And when I was growing up, people smoked everywhere. Parents smoked in the house in front of kids. People smoked in the car. Guys, I was an adult out of college when bars and restaurants went smoke-free, okay? So like, this is not in your lifetime, but it's in your parents' lifetime. Quitting nicotine is super hard. Nicotine is highly addictive. It has the highest reinforcement rate of any addictive substance. Eating disorders, also a big health concern, especially amongst young people, right? These are physical and mental disorders that involve intense dieting or other unhealthy methods of weight control, driven by a desire to be thin. Society obviously plays an enormous role in this, right? People post pictures online, on Instagram, on social media, and people rip them apart, right? People are super critical of other people's bodies. People comment on what people are eating, right? Gender plays a role. Girls and women are more affected by these diseases than men, but it affects people from all types of social backgrounds. In our culture, we sort of associate being thin with being successful and attractive. Most college-age women think guys like thin girls, right? And so there is a lot of stigma attached to being overweight, despite the fact that most Americans are overweight, okay? 73% of U.S. adults are overweight. This has massive impacts on us, right? It limits our physical activity, it raises risks of diseases, right? People treat us differently when we're bigger. And so here we can see 1996 versus 2020, right? Percentages of folks that are considered obese. Drugs is a scourge in our society, in particular the opioid epidemic's been going on for a couple decades now. That's a leading cause of death amongst all people under the age of 55. Opiates are incredibly addictive and very, very, very hard to kick. The opiate crisis really starts with the invention of OxyContin by Purdue Pharma. And people and doctors and others just really pushing the idea that like the way we solve all our problems is with pills. Sexually transmitted infections. I feel like people don't talk about this as much, so I really hope your generation's been taught about this, right? We often view these as like, ooh, this says something bad and dirty about you. In the 60s, we have a sexual revolution. We have the birth control pill. People are having sex more. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, except that it means sexually transmitted infections, which used to be called sexually transmitted diseases, which, depending on how old of a thing you're reading or viewing, might also be called VD, venereal diseases, right? But the rate of these are high. The rate of this is increasing amongst boomers because boomers are retired, right? Their spouses have passed on. Some of them, they're living in these retirement villages and they're getting a little frisky with each other. And they'd been married for 30, 40 years and they don't know about using protection. So we always need to use condoms, folks. Gonorrhea and syphilis, right, are caused by microscopic organisms. They're transmitted by sexual contact. These are both easily cured with antibiotics, right? However, you want to make sure you catch them quickly. So if you're engaging in unprotected sex, when you're going to your doctor annually, you should probably make sure you're getting tested, right? So gonorrhea can make you sterile. Syphilis, if it progresses, will literally cause you to go insane. Many of our founding fathers had syphilis. Genital herpes is transmitted by a virus. Sexual contact, by the way, if you have contact with someone, if you have a cold sore, is also the herpes virus. If you have a cold sore on your lip and your lip touches someone's genitals, that can then become genital herpes. Okay, it wouldn't become that on your lip, but you could transfer it from your lip to someone's genitals. It's not fatal to adults. It can kill babies, and it's treatable, but you can't make it go away forever. It's not curable. AIDS and HIV, also treatable, less fatal than it used to be, but generally speaking fatal, right? So this is caused by HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, which basically attacks your immune system, and it makes people vulnerable to diseases that like other people just don't catch. HIV gets transmitted through drug use, sharing needles, anal sex. This is weird that it doesn't just say vaginal sex or oral sex because it could be transmitted that way as well. The government was really slow to respond to this. They called it gay cancer at first, and people were very scared to even tend to folks who had this in the hospital because we didn't know much about how it was transmitted. There's quite a few folks that got it originally from like blood transfusions because we didn't know to test the blood for this. Now blood is routinely tested for this, so I don't even know if anybody catches it this way anymore, but people used to. There are some treatments. There have been some places, some programs, some protocols. Mass General ran one of these. I met someone who had been through one of these protocols where HIV, it's not considered cured, but it's no longer detectable in his system. I believe this is true for Magic Johnson as well, and you guys could like take a second to Google him and check if you wanted to that it's no longer detectable in his blood either. Okay, what about death? Death is an irreversible state. Obviously, we cannot bring you back from the dead, right? It's when moving, breathing, reflexes, no brain activity. There's a debate here, like, do we have a right to die, right? So what happens, as you guys are becoming young adults, a thing to think about is what kind of advanced directives you want. If something were to happen to you, if you were in a coma, if you were unconscious in the hospital, what kind of life-preserving measures do you want and under what circumstances? Do you have a living will that states what your intents are, or to designate a person who would make those decisions? So some folks think that people should have a right to die, right? And want there to be provisions for euthanasia, right? This is where we assist in the death of a person suffering from an incurable disease. There's physician-assisted euthanasia. I think this only exists in Oregon in the U.S., and it's basically, should terminally ill people have a right to die? We've had such great advances in medicine, right? So in colonial times, Doctors, not trained the way they are now. Herbalists, druggists, barbers, midwives, ministered, all practice healing arts. You'd get these medicines. They were called patent medicines. You did not know what was in them. A lot of times it was opium. Okay. The AMA is founded in 1847, and it starts promoting a scientific model of medicine, right? Now, there's people who still practice, but are not considered doctors, aren't considered part of the medical profession, or have a lower standing within the medical profession, right? We mostly practice Western medicine, which is what you see when you go to your doctor. But there's also holistic medicine, things that really focus on like prevention and like herbs and supplements. And are there things that are more like Eastern medicine that you could do that might help you, right? That's everything from like meditation. Also, obviously, part of our health and our medicine is things like physical exercise, right? Like all the things that today we probably call self-care, right? How do we take care of ourselves? Now, in China, their approach to health is based on that holistic approach, right? Government controls most medical care, and they have these doctors called barefoot doctors. They're basically healthcare workers who provide healthcare to rural communities. In Russia, everyone's required to purchase government health insurance. They can also buy private health insurance, right? In most of Europe, they have socialized medicine. You pay heavy taxes, but like pretty much your healthcare is covered. Here in the US, we have mostly what's called employer-provided healthcare. Although your employer does not actually provide that, that's kind of a misnomer. Your employer pays a certain part of it and you pay a certain part of it. You will still pay several $100s a month for your insurance. And it won't cover everything, and you'll have a copay at the doctor's office. Sweden and Great Britain, right? These guys have mandatory comprehensive medical care. So high taxes, right? But the medical system, the government owns it. Everybody gets seen at the doctors. You rarely walk out of the doctors with a bill. I've seen some stories online. People go to the emergency room. They break their leg. It costs them like $35. Canada has a single payer model. The government basically acts like an insurance company. In Japan, doctors operate privately. So here we can see what countries have, socialized medicine. And so, yeah, you pay more in taxes, but I think most of those people are still probably paying less in taxes than we're paying for our portion that's not covered by our employer. So the U.S. has direct fee system. We pay our doctors directly, right? So we might have insurance. You might have to pay your doctor directly. Does the doctor you want to see take your insurance? Several states have programs that provide care to everyone. So we have the Affordable Care Act here nationally, which is often referred to as Obamacare. It's the same thing we had here in Massachusetts, which it's funny when the Conservative Party is like, the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act is based on Massachusetts, which was under a conservative Republican governor named Mitt Romney. Okay, so the public has been led to believe that like this private worker employer system is great. Your employer provides your insurance, but your employer does not really provide your insurance. Like I said, here I think it pays 2/3 of the fee and we pay 1/3 of the fee. And then I also pay a copay when I go to the doctor's office. And then there's parts that aren't covered as well. Like you still get a bill. Okay. Health insurance industry, huge lobby. American Medical Association, huge lobby. They oppose this. They oppose having like more socialized medicine in the U.S. So 66% of the U.S. population is private insurance. Things like Medicare and Medicaid and what the veterans get, that is public insurance programs. Everybody's taxes pay for that. Medicare is for folks over 65. Medicaid is for people that are low income. These are actually pretty good insurance benefits, like possibly better than what you're getting through your employer. The veterans also have free health care. However, they wait a very long time to see doctors, and their system is not, it's not great. Most private insurance is a health maintenance organization, provides comprehensive medical care. Nobody provides full coverage. So I mentioned the Affordable Care Act made changes to the healthcare system, and it provided healthcare for more people. You're paying out of pocket, and you're paying less than you would have paid for private insurance yourself. That's not sponsored by your employer, but you're at least getting access to insurance. It's also a nursing shortage. This was intensified during COVID. In 2022, we needed about 1 million more nurses than we had. This is a result of technology, rapid expansion in outpatient services, focus on preventive care, an aging population, right? So the boomers are getting older. The boomers are probably your grandparents' generation, because it's my parents' generation, right? As everybody ages, we need more healthcare, but there's more older people now, right? There's more boomers than there are Gen X, and more boomers than there are Gen Z and millennials. Nursing attracts young people, right? You can actually make great money in nursing, but the working conditions are really hard. People work hours that are kind of rough. My mom was a nurse when I was a kid. She worked a lot of 3 to 11 or 11 to 7. That's 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. All right, now let's look at our theories. So medicine, what function does it serve? It's supposed to help keep people healthy, right? Illness is a dysfunction. It impacts our ability to perform our roles, right? That's all our roles. Can you go to work? Can you take care of your children, right? When you're sick, it sucks, right? This approach, though, the structural functional approach, links illness and medicine to broader societal organizations, which is true, right? It applies to acute conditions better than chronic illnesses, right? Things that are happening right now that can be cured or taken care of. Illness is not entirely dysfunctional. It also gives doctors primary responsibility for health. That symbolic interaction perspective says society, right, is changing and subjective. Health and medical care are socially constructed. That is 100% true, right? Think about mental health, right? What we consider an illness changes. So like we know today addiction is an illness, right? But if you ask some boomers, they probably know this too, but if you have great grandparents that are still alive, or maybe even your grandparents, many of them might tell you that, addiction is a choice, right? Being gay was considered a mental illness until 1976. One thing to think about, though, is once we've been told we have a condition, even if we don't really have that condition, it can become real in its consequences, right? And people get misdiagnosed, right? There's a big thing happening now, like in terms of ADHD, where we've really discovered that the way ADHD presents in women is very different. And so many women who have ADHD were never diagnosed. The average age of first diagnosis for ADHD for women is now somewhere in the mid-30s, whereas for boys, it's like 9, 10, 11. Those aren't exact numbers. Like, Google them if you need them. But it's around there. And that many women who are diagnosed with anxiety has a lot of features and traits in common with ADHD, may have ADHD instead. Treatment is also socially constructed, right? Think about it. Your doctor wears like a uniform, right? Your doctor probably wears like nice dressy clothes, right? And then has that lab coat over it. The exam room is set up a certain way. What impact does it have on us when we've had surgery? It also really impacts us. Like, what do we see as healthy? What do we see as harmful, right? So like trends, like I said, when I was growing up, like people were like, yep, milk is the healthy drink you have at dinner, right? Healthy families had milk at dinner, not soda. Today we're like, too much cow's milk is not good for people, right? Also, when I was a kid, like you had juice in the morning. You had apple juice, you had orange juice. And today we're like, juice has so much sugar in it. Not a great idea to have it all the time, right? Today, people drink much more water than they ever did before, right? Nobody had bottled water when I was a kid. If you had water, you drank tap water, right? I did have a friend who their family drank tap water a lot, and we all thought it was odd because that's not what we had in our house. Medical procedures, right, can also be socially constructed, right? How we see our bodies, how we understand them. Now, in terms of social conflict, right, this points out the connection between health, social inequality, and capitalism, right? So let's think about feminist perspectives, right? Women are treated very differently at the doctors. So there's all kinds of like female care where we don't get any anesthetic in the doctor's office. Things happen to us. We're often told that if we wanted to have our tubes tied, right, or we wanted to, that like doctors will often deny women the opportunity to do that because what if you get married later and your husband wants kids? Okay. We don't ever say to men like, if they want to get a vasectomy, what if you get married and she wants to have kids? Okay. There's all kinds of procedures women have, like having an IUD inserted, I had a biopsy where they took a tiny piece of my uterus to check for something. There is zero anesthesia for that. Like they literally cut out a piece of your uterus and you're just going to like white knuckle it. Okay. Access to care. Women are often told like, oh, honey, that's probably anxiety, right? Women's pain is often ignored. There was this scandal at Yale of all places, right? You would assume if you're going to Yale for fertility treatment, you're getting the best fertility treatment, right? It's Yale. It's an Ivy League institution. Many women were having their eggs harvested and they were reporting that they were experiencing extreme pain, but they were supposedly given fentanyl. Well, it turned out there was a nurse there who was siphoning off the fentanyl for her personal use and then putting saline back in the bottles. Many, many, many women complained. And people were just like, and then these women were told, I think fentanyl doesn't work for you, right? Then they'd go in for some other procedure and they'd tell a doctor like, fentanyl doesn't work for me. Nah, saline doesn't work as pain management because that's what they were getting, right? And eventually this nurse got caught, but people just dismissed women, right? Access to care. We live in a climate right now where the government's also really trying to control women's bodies, right? How much care do you have access to? Again, we're in Boston. Guys, you can find a specialist for whatever problem you have here. In fact, you have cancer, you have many, many excellent places you can go for care. What happens if you live in a more rural area, if you live somewhere else in the country? What can you also afford for care? If you really want to scare yourself a little bit, Google how much it costs to have a baby. You would think insurance would cover it. It doesn't cover all of it. Okay? It's 5 digits of debt when you have a baby in the hospital. So this, medicine is profit, right? Insurance companies make money, right? It turns doctors, hospitals, pharmaceutical industries. You'll find now, right, your doctor will prescribe a medicine for you. Your insurance company will decide they're not going to pay for it. The insurance company will be like, it's not necessary. Okay, my doctor said it was necessary. Some bureaucrat who's like sitting in an office who works for my HMO can decide it's not necessary. As I mentioned, politics are involved in medicine right now. So this is a perspective that tells us how health, medicine, and society are related, right? It tells us how social inequality plays a role in some people getting better health care than others. So looking ahead, more people are taking responsibility for their own health, right? I love that your generation is much more aware of things like anxiety and depression and how can you deal with that. My generation did not talk about that. Many of us were adults before we realized the feelings we were having were anxiety or that we had depression or we had some other kind of mental illness, right? That might be super treatable. You guys are much more aware of self-care and the need to take care of yourself and the importance of rest. And that makes me so happy. As a middle-aged woman, that is a thing I'm working on now and I'm getting better about it, but it's just not ingrained in me. And I'm so glad it's ingrained in you guys. And that self-care and that taking care of yourself can look like whatever you want it to look like. Maybe you take walks. Maybe you lift serious heavy weights. Maybe you paint to calm yourself down and relax. Maybe you're into yoga and running. Whatever your thing is. As I mentioned already, healthcare is political, right? Conservatives think you're responsible for your personal well-being and that healthcare should be like a free market model. Whereas progressives often think that the responsibility for healthcare falls on the government.